Before 1800, more people came to America from Africa than from anywhere else, and most of them came in chains. Their toil helped make the United States the richest nation on earth.
Slavery was no sideshow in American history. It was the main event.
America was a slave-owning country longer than it has been a free one, and the legacy of slavery haunts us still.
We've made certain progress in race relations, but we'll never get further until we look more closely at slavery.
This is a story of resistance and the struggle to maintain human dignity. It is a story of the demand for freedom told through the lives of enslaved people. And it's the story of the founding fathers you never knew. They were from Africa and Europe. Some were enslaved, some were indentured servants. All of them were poor and exploited. Their status as workers was confusing and complex. Their lives were controlled by the Dutch West India Company. Day after day, they struggled to survive the harsh world of Dutch New Amsterdam in the 1620s. Evening after evening, they gathered in taverns.
Taverns were places where you gathered to talk about your problems. And slaves would complain about their masters, and indentured servants would complain about their masters. So they had a lot of interracial bonding in these taverns.
You have people who indenture themselves. They promise their labor to a wealthy person for 7 years in order to pay off the price of coming to the New World.
The Dutch West India Company had established a fur trading post in 1624 on a hilly island called Manhattan. The area would become New York City. Less than 200 people lived in the settlement. Most were men from Northern Europe who worked for the company. To make larger profits, the Dutch West India Company wanted free labor. Free Africans had come to the New World with European explorers in the 1530s. English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia purchased 20 Africans from Dutch traders in 1619. 5 years later, the first enslaved Africans arrived in Dutch New Amsterdam. Their bondage began approximately 200 years of slavery in what would become America's northern states.
The first 11 enslaved people, all male, who came to New Amsterdam were brought by the Dutch West India Company. They were owned by the company, not by individuals. So they're company slaves, and they're brought by the company for the purpose of building the colony.
It was quite common for the Dutch and for the English to raid the wealthier Spanish and the Portuguese shipping to get people and to get property. So these people really are, in a sense, prisoners of war.
These people come out of a larger Atlantic world in the 14th and 15th century as Africa, Europe, and the Americas meet for the first time. We call them Atlantic Creoles.
Atlantic Creoles had cultural roots in both Africa and Europe. Some were the offspring of European men and African women. Some traveled the seas with Europeans. Some may have been literate. Many spoke multiple languages.
The names of the first 11 indicate some of that mixture. The names Simon Congo, or Anthony Portuguese, or John d'Angola. These names are European names, Simon, Anthony, John, they're Christian names. And then the last names, Portuguese, indicating a connection with Portugal, perhaps with a Portuguese explorer, or Congo, indicating this is a Christian African who came from the Congo.
The enslaved did not know if or when freedom would come. In the settlements of Virginia, Massachusetts, and New Amsterdam, slavery was undefined. There were no laws, no rules, no regulations.
It was a difficult, hard life. They are expected to work regardless of the weather, regardless of the temperature, because their work is what was valuable, not their person.
Work began at sunrise. The company forced the first 11 to clear land, construct roads, and unload ships. They were both manual and skilled workers. Their labor helped build the Dutch New Amsterdam economy.
The first 11 slaves were there really to provide the infrastructure. So they were really the backbone of this early colony and really were integral to the survival of Europeans.
Because the Dutch did fear racial mixture, they were not interested in marriages between Creoles and Dutch women or Belgian women. Therefore, by the late 1620s, they brought in Creole or African women into the colony.
The women are ostensibly brought, as the company says, for the comfort of our Negro men. They will need to perform at least 2 jobs, which is to be sexual partners for the men, but to be hard workers as well. The men are going to be very important then in helping these women navigate, since the men have been there for slightly longer than the women and understand the terrain.
Slaves in New Amsterdam during this time have rights that we think of as unusual for enslaved people. They have the right to earn wages. They have the right to keep those wages. Europeans are dependent on enslaved people, and so they need to, in a sense, appease them.
Because slavery had no legal structure, the Atlantic Creoles were able to negotiate for greater autonomy. In 1635, several of them petitioned the Dutch West India Company for wages they believed the company owed them. Anthony Portuguese sued a white merchant in 1638. A year later, Pedro Negreto and Manuel de Rus successfully sued Europeans for wages due. Court records indicate that Atlantic Creoles made the system work for them when they could.
In some African slavery, there is a greater sense of the rights of the enslaved people. There's a greater sense of obligation on the part of the community. And I think that these enslaved people bring that idea of slavery with them.
In 1641, Anthony van Angola, one of the first 11, married Lucy de Angola. It was the first recorded marriage between black people in Dutch New Amsterdam.
The enslaved understand legitimating a marriage is a way to claim ground. They are sophisticated interpreters of the landscape.
In Europeans' religious beliefs, you were not supposed to enslave another Christian, and African people knew this and attempted to convert to Christianity. So Christianity was this space that Africans tried to build into a space of negotiation for greater freedom. Now, in reality, many enslaved people were Christian, and the fact that they were baptized and were practicing Christians meant nothing in terms of their status as a free people.
The Dutch West India Company has a very problematic relationship with the area Native Americans. By 1639, relations had deteriorated into war. At that point, a number of the Creoles are put into the military force against the Indians.
There is a fear among Europeans during this time that African Americans may join with Native Americans. And the first 11, in fact, used this fear to negotiate.
They had been part of the Reformed Church, they had served in the military, they had built the fort, they had done all of the critical labor that was necessary to make New Amsterdam into a viable town. Now, it was their time to be free.
The company responded with what has become known as half-freedom. These men and their wives could live on what became known as the free Negro lots. They could farm their own land, and they paid a kind of tribute in return to the company. The company also had the right to call them up if they needed their labor.
Don't get the idea that these were just nice people and wanted to allow these Africans an opportunity. They calculated they could make more money with half freedom, and therefore they used that system. But even under those conditions, work in the Dutch colonies for a slave was slavery.
The members of this community of half-free people had to be very profoundly struck with the tentative and tenuous nature of their freedom. The evidence of that is their children, who are not half-free, who remain enslaved, and therefore, in a very profound way, speak to the fact that the community itself is vulnerable.
Half-free blacks don't separate themselves from enslaved blacks. In fact, they work at times to try and negotiate freedom for other enslaved people. Over the years, these 11 men and their wives continue to bargain, petition for freedom for their children.
New Amsterdam is now becoming a good-sized town. At least 20% of the people are black. Some of them are slaves, some are half-free, some are free, but wherever you are in that spectrum, you can see the possibilities.
Half-freedom is this moment where a group of slaves has moved to a new status, and there's probably a belief among the people in the slave community that they too can achieve a new status. Not perfect, not full freedom, but something better and more autonomous than what had existed before.